There's nothing more corrosive than the PayGo. This is what Pelosi is now advancing, and it had been in play since the Obama era. What are your thoughts on how to overcome this PayGo mindset?
Well, it's funny that that mindset doesn't seem to apply when they pass $1.5 trillion tax cut. Don't have to worry about paying for that. Don't have to worry about paying for an extra $100 billion for the Defense Department's budget. But if you're going to talk about Medicare for all, tuition-free higher education, somehow you've got to cut money somewhere else, cut funding somewhere else. No, that's not the way to go. The PayGo is a farce. It's been around a lot longer, I think, than people realize. It goes way back to the 1980s, and what was it, the Graham-Rudman-Hollings budget framework. And my old boss, Paul Tsongas, a Democrat from Massachusetts, and other Democrats bought into even that balanced budget type of mentality back in the 1980s, which I thought was very unfortunate. And this is what reinforces the mindset of austerity and the reality of austerity, and it prevents creative solutions to our problems. I think we need federal subsidies for teacher salaries, K-12, and we need a lot more teachers. And the federal government could solve that problems without breaking a sweat, and yet it's unwilling to do so. So some of our challenge, I think, is to explain to voters, whether we're explaining it through modern money theory or we're explaining it through the prism of American economic history, where we saw, again, the New Deal and World War II, the federal spending and the budget deficit was so much higher as a percentage of the overall economy than it is today. And it didn't lead to a parade of horribles, quite the opposite. The country enjoyed its best economic growth and more equitable distributions of wealth and income and opportunity than we have today. So I do think a lot of our mission is to educate folks on American history and on economic realities like you are doing all the time. I also think that there's room for creative solutions that don't add to the budget deficit. So maybe you could criticize it and say, well, you're playing into the balanced budget mindset. Look, I don't think it is. What I'm driving at is, let's have a national infrastructure bank and let's fund it with the Federal Reserve. The Federal Reserve can print money out of the blue. They had their quantitative easing programs, which didn't add to the budget deficit. You know, they create $3 trillion, $4 trillion out of thin air. It doesn't lead to budget deficits. They can loan the money at 0.25% interest rates like they did to Wall Street banks and hedge funds. There's so many ways the Fed could fully fund a national infrastructure bank without adding a penny to the deficit. And then on top of that, once the Fed throws $1 trillion or $2 trillion into infrastructure that way, well, look at what the result is. The infrastructure banks start putting people to work. When you take unemployed resources and suddenly give them an income, those become tax-paying resources now. And they say that the Marshall Plan and the GI Bill, huge federal outlays in the 1940s and 50s, more than paid for themselves. I think the estimates are something like 5 times over, in the form of higher economic growth rates and higher tax revenues being paid by the folks who essentially were employed in those programs. So I do think that there's lots of ways to fix our economy, and we should not be shackled by the PayGo rules. And Nancy Pelosi is such a joke, really. This is somebody who, the only reason she's still the Democratic leader in the House is because all the corporations want her there. Nobody else does. And this is somebody who's made a fortune, I think $100 million for herself as a member of Congress. I think there should be a lot more investigation about how members of Congress get rich while they're there. I know they exempted themselves from insider trading rules, and of course, their very positions allow them to be privy to all kinds of inside information and to trade on it legally. Everyone else has to go away to jail or be prosecuted if they engage in that kind of insider trading, but not for members of Congress. This is what's wrong, and I see it all the time. Again, getting back to the experience in my race with destroyed ballots, what it says to me is there's no reason to have any real faith or confidence in the election system, and the fact that there's not prosecutions says that there's little reason to have a lot of faith or confidence in our criminal justice system at the highest levels. It's almost as if you're wealthy and politically connected, you're above the law. And we saw this after the Wall Street crisis, where Eric Holder's Justice Department prosecuted nobody of real significance, and there was no real investigative work going on. And I know Holder's doing the rounds now on public radio and everywhere else, saying that they really didn't have any cases to prosecute, that they didn't have any evidence. Well, I'll tell you, just go to Frontline's PBS episode called The Untouchables. Anyone can see it for themselves.
Yes.
There's a reason there were no prosecutions, and it's the revolving door. It's because Eric Holder and Lonnie Brewer, the head of his criminal division, basically sold out the American people and took very lucrative partnerships at law firms that represent these big banksters.